that's going to actually focus more in on the slides, and we can go through this. So what I plan to do is basically give a full review of the PMBOK project management body of knowledge methodology. Right? We know that there are 5 process groups, the 10 knowledge areas, the 49 process, and the flow of the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs. How do these things relate, and how do we make sense out of these 5 plus 10 plus 49 different things? That's going to be roughly half the webinar. And the second half is going to be kind of a refresher on 2, what I call the tricky logic and math centric aspects of the project management methodology that we covered in our classes, and that being scheduling and controlling costs. So we'll go over what the precedence diagram is, talk about dependencies, leads, and lags, and the ever popular critical path method and determining float in non-critical path activities, and then going through some of the earned value management and forecasting formulas that are important in determining the status relative to cost control. As most of you have already seen, there's a chat function on YouTube that you have to log into. You have to sign in using either a Gmail ID or a YouTube ID or any type of Google ID, and then you could use chat. I'm going to collect the questions. I'm not going to be able to answer them real time with you. I'm going to have to kind of stick to my program, but at certain periods, we'll go back. I'll look through the questions and see what we can either cover in more detail or point back to or clarify. And like I mentioned, the entire event, this entire event is being recorded, right? It's being recorded, and it will become available to you. So if you want to look back on it at a later date, tomorrow, sometime in the future, if you're studying or need to call upon this for for any type of recollection, it'll be out there, and I'm gonna term it indefinitely. I'm not going to delete it anytime soon. So let's get started. Let's get started with what we call the PMBOK methodology. Right? PMBOK methodology, again, as mentioned in the introduction, 5 process groups, 10 knowledge areas, 49 management processes. We're going to go into those in detail with a focus on what they are functionally and how they interact. How do the knowledge areas interact with the process groups? What are the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs? I put a question mark next to it because I know that there's 49 processes. I know there's 10 knowledge areas, and I know there's 5 process groups. I can count them. I can count them up. I'm not going to bother counting up the inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs. Rumor has it that there's 700 and some odd or 800. I'll take it at that there's just more than you're going to be able to memorize. What we want to do is we want to understand how this process works and what makes sense as being an output of one process that feeds in and becomes the input to another. And that's pretty much what I want to go through and maybe spend a little time with this afternoon. Anybody who's taken my classes, very familiar with my GEAR model, right? Those are our 5 process groups. We start off with initiating. Initiating is our first process group. It starts out, and we state the objectives as they're communicated to us, as they're revealed to us by your sponsor and stakeholder. We capture that in a project charter. Okay? We want to state those objectives so that we know where we're going and what's important to the project. Initiating also provides the authorization to begin actively managing the project drafting resources, spending money, and achieving those objectives. So it's a kind of our kickoff. We move along to planning as another process group, and planning is where we organize and prepare. Okay, very, very, very straightforward. Planning is organization and preparation. What you plan, you're going to have to eventually do. So executing is where we do the work, where deliverables are built, where money is spent, right? Where items are tested, right? They're validated, they're verified. And all the while, your project team is doing the work that they're skilled at doing. The third gear in this little section here, we call monitoring and controlling, because that's where we basically compare and contrast what we planned to do with what was actually accomplished. And we want to say, are we doing what we planned to do? Are we doing what we said we would do? And if not, what preventative or corrective actions need to take place to either replan because maybe we were too aggressive, maybe the plan is not feasible, or maybe the execution is not running properly and needs to be adjusted, refined, and performance needs to be improved. So monitoring and controlling is going to establish any type of variance between what we said we were going to do and what we're actually doing. It's going to stay in this loop, right? You're going to plan work, you're going to execute it, you're going to see how it was done. It's going to go back to replan, execute, and it's going to spin these gears around until you're finally done, right? Because we all know a project is a temporary endeavor, okay? Temporary meaning that closing, we're going to turn over our deliverables, our results, to an operations unit, to an owner, to a customer. We're not going to cling to it. We're not going to own it forever. Okay? So we have knowledge areas. So what are we talking about when we say knowledge areas? Right? Let's hold integration aside. It's the first one listed in your PMBOK text, but it's really an overarching one, and it makes more sense when you understand the other 9. So let's look at scope, and we answer the question, what will be produced? What is the end result? What are we looking to build? And schedule management says, well, when will it be finished? Answers that question. Cost management answers the question, how much will it cost? Quality management answers the question, well, now that it's built and we spent money on it, is it meeting customer expectations? What does the customer demand for this particular product, service, or result? Resource management, who and what is needed to get the job done. Right? When we talk about resource management, we're talking about who being human resources, and we're talking about what being physical resources, materials, equipment, etc., supplies. Communication management, how will everybody know? How will everybody know what? How will everybody know it's their time to do work? When they're expected to be doing it? What the customer expectations are, so on and so forth. Communication also wraps around all of these knowledge areas, as does risk management. Risk management, what is uncertain? What may not occur without any type of probability, right? We're talking about risk management. It could be a positive or a negative. Remember, when we talk about risk, we have opportunity as well as threats. It's anything that's not certain. So we have to have a way of addressing what's not certain, and what different options and contingencies might be. Procurement management, are there contracts? Okay, if we're dealing with third parties, we might have different procurement contracts. We might have service level agreements. We might have fixed price contracts for time and materials. We might have purchase orders, all contracts, and what are the details and terms and conditions associated with those contracts relevant to our project. And we have stakeholder management. We ask the question, are they engaged? Are the stakeholders engaged? Do they understand where we are in the project? Can they help us to motivate resources that are under their management? Are they engaged to make decisions? Are they engaged to work cross-functionally? So taking all these 9 knowledge areas, we look at integration management, tying them all together. I'm going to borrow from George Lucas in Star Wars, right? It's like the Force. Integration management surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together in my best Obi-Wan Kenobi voice. That's as good as it gets. But yes, it binds them all together. It shows the interaction and integration between the competencies of all of these other knowledge areas. So we go on to talk about 49 project management processes. Now we're talking about actually functions. We're talking about things that have defined meanings. It's not as broad based as just doing the work. We get into the knowledge areas about, well, what type of work are we doing? What type of aspects of the project are we planning? What types of variances are we looking to control? So you'll see this chart, and this is just kind of a reinterpretation of a chart that exists in the PMBOK. I just took out some noise to make it more viewable on the screen. But you'll see the 5 process groups going across the top and the 10 knowledge areas going down vertically on the left side. Right? So you'll see in initiation, we have develop project charter, which is an integration function and process, and identify stakeholders. And we're going to go through more of a flow than a chart of how these are connected. But I'd like to just point out at this point, 49 things, right? It's not 800 and something, it's not 700 and something, but it's still a lot to think about. 49 things to keep straight in your mind sounds, like a lot, especially if you're studying for a certification test, if you're studying for CAPM or PMP exam, which I'm assuming that many of you are. You might want to just look at this and try to make sense out of it. And what I'll say is, in planning, we're developing the project management plan. It kind of makes sense. And then you'll notice for each of the knowledge area, there will be a plan for that knowledge area's management plan. So, for example, in scope, we're going to plan scope management. In schedule, we're going to plan schedule management, etc., for costs, quality, and down the line through stakeholder. That's 10. That's 10 out of the 49. Just say, yeah, for every knowledge area, we need to have some degree of planning. Yes, for other knowledge areas, there are more specific planning processes. We'll get to those. But you'll see also in monitoring and controlling that we monitor and control project work, but for each of the knowledge areas, 10 in total, we will have either a control scope, control schedule, control quality, etc. And in some cases, monitor risks, monitor communications, monitor stakeholders, right? So we're going to have one of each of these knowledge areas in either a monitoring or controlling process. That is up to 20. That's nearly half of your processes. So it kind of makes it a little less daunting if you're trying to study and trying to prepare for a test. That if you just looked at it that way, it makes sense. Closing, there's only one. Close the project or phase. So let's begin with initiating. Let's begin with initiating. And the first process in initiating is to develop the project charter. And I'm going to go through this in a very logical manner. I want this to make sense to you. And when we get to the end of this little section, there'll be time enough for questions if you have any. Write them in on the chat. Write them down on a piece of paper if that's more comfortable for you. Think about them, and we'll have time to answer them. But we're going to start with initiating right at the beginning when we develop our project charter. And closely related is identifying the stakeholders. Because maybe you might get the project charter, the seed, or the information that's going to encompass your project charter from a single person, a customer or a sponsor or an executive, project executive, right? And then you might have to go out and look for other stakeholders because they're referred to in your initial briefing on the project charter. But what you're going to find is through the identification of stakeholders and talking to them, it's going to feed back to the project charter because they're going to give you some more information that's going to need to be captured. This isn't the planning. We're not going into too much detail, and that's a common misunderstanding and actually a mistake for a lot of professional project managers, that they spend too much time getting into too much detail into the project charter. When you really want this to be very quick, high level, show objectives, so you can move on to detailed planning and involve more people. Right? Get the project authorized. Your project charter is going to authorize your project. That's what makes it real. People are going to listen to you. If you have to go to people within your organization, they may not listen to you unless you have proper authorization and funding, okay, and executive backing for what you're doing. Then it becomes real. Then they kind of have to follow. And from identify stakeholders, we're going to come up with a stakeholder register. That's a project document that's going to just record who the stakeholders are and some basic contact information, what department they're from, what organization they might be from, contact information, etc. With that, we can go into our planning processes. And the first thing you're going to want to do is develop your project management plan. A lot is spoken about project management plans, right? And it's got to start somewhere, and it becomes very large. It becomes very encompassing. The project's charter is your basis of information that's going to start your project management plan, along with two other inputs: enterprise environmental factors and operational process assets. They are used in all of planning processes. Okay? They're going to become inputs. So when you look at inputs and you're doing a planning process, you know that you're going to have enterprise environmental factors. They're conditions that your project is going to operate in. They're industry standards. They're laws and compliance if you're in financial compliance, solvency, any type of legal. Outside of that, strictly environmental, right? Where are you located? Are you a multinational? What currency do you work in? What time zones? What language is spoken, right? If you're multinational, you might have that. That is a factor. Operational process assets. They're assets. They are things that are at your disposal that'll make your job easier because somebody has previously put them there. They may be templates, right? They may be schedule templates, right? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It might be training and software is operational process assets. All of these become influences to how you manage your project, and that's what your project management plan is. It defines how you're going to manage a project. I like to think of it as a rule book, right? It's like baseball. If you're playing baseball, there's a rule book that says it's a 9 inning game, right? It, there's each team gets 3 outs, right? A batter, 3 strikes and you're out. 4 balls and you walk. There's rules about foul balls, right? There's rules about getting hit by the pitch. Okay? It doesn't contain the score of a particular game. It doesn't say who's winning the game or who's losing the game. It's more of a rule book. And that's what the project management plan, it becomes guidelines for how you're going to manage a project. And to take the baseball metaphor one step further, there are different rule books for different leagues or games, right? Your little league game that your child is playing in may have different rules than Major League Baseball. The distance to first base is a lot closer, right? The distance is not 90 feet. So they may bring out, I know the little kids, they bring out the tee rather than striking out because they want kids running and getting some exercise. So your project management plan is the rule book for your project. So it becomes very large. It becomes like a file cabinet of many different aspects of the project. It'll tell you the project lifecycle phases if you're taking a phased approach. It'll tell you the approach, whether you're in a predictive, adaptive, or some type of hybrid. Remember, adaptive they call agile, right? Or it could be a hybrid approach. It contains our change management plan. How are we going to introduce changes to the rules? How are we going to introduce changes and communicate them out? And it's going to contain our subsidiary management plan. That's all of the management plans for all of the knowledge areas. They're all going to feed back into our project management plan. So we have our scope management plan that tells you how you're going to manage scope. Scope management is driven by quality management, right? Scope management tells you what you're going to do. Quality management is going to tell you, well, what are the standards to how you produce it and how you complete it. The stakeholder engagement is going to drive the quality management, right? Quality management comes from a customer perspective, and the stakeholders are the eyes and ears of the customer, if not the customer themselves. So they're going to have a lot of influence over quality management. Once you know what you're going to do, you need to have a schedule to say when you're going to do it. And who's going to do it and what's needed. Resource management plan. That's going to drive your schedule. Quality is going to drive what resources you use. Right? Quality is going to influence the skill level of the project team members. It's going to influence the grade of the materials that you use. And that all has a time component that will be reflected in your schedule management plan. Resources come at a cost. You're going to have a cost management plan. How are you going to manage project costs? If you're going outside your organization, how you spend the money is going to be reflected and controlled and planned within a procurement management plan. And everything is going to be subject to risk because there are uncertainties in all of the categories, in all of the knowledge areas, and communication. Communication is between stakeholders, right? Project manager themselves is a stakeholder, right? The project team is a stakeholder. Customers, executives, management, sponsor, they're all stakeholders. And you communicate with people. Those are your project people. So all of these are going to feed into this file cabinet of rules and guidelines of your project management plan. A little bit more specific within planning, we're going to get into the detail about what we're building within scope management, right? Scope at a high level can't be built. You're going to have to go and collect requirements to define exactly what it is that you're building. And that will provide you with a requirements documentation. It's also going to provide you with, as an output, right? The arrows going out of the box mean output, traceability matrix. Very important document because we want to know, it's like a checklist. We want to know that over the course of all the project phases that our requirements are verified, that our requirements are captured, they're designed into the deliverable, that they're tested, and that they're presented for final acceptance. Right? It eliminates or it reduces. Nothing eliminates surprises, but it will reduce surprises. It's a good tool. Our requirements document is going to now go into a process called defining scope, which will yield a scope statement. That scope statement is going to pretty much restate what we said in our project charter for high-level scope. Think of it as an executive summary. Think of it as an executive summary. An executive is not going to read all the gory details of your requirement doc, so you distill it down to a scope statement. So the executives, so everybody that may not have a full interest in every aspect, they may look at requirements document for what they're interested in, just look at the scope statement for things that are maybe tangential to their concerns. So the requirement document and the scope statement will go into a process called create work breakdown structure. Work breakdown structure, WBS, is a decomposition of our deliverables into smaller chunks that are more easily managed. If something is at too high a level, it becomes unmanageable. You can't even assign it. You can't estimate it. You don't know when it's done. You don't know how many people are involved in working on it. So you break it down, and that becomes our scope baseline. Our scope baseline work breakdown structure now feeds something called define activities, a project scheduling process. Okay? Project scheduling. When are we going to do these things? So we want to turn our nouns, right? Our decomposition of deliverables, our nouns, into verbs. Activities are actions. Okay? And that'll give us an activity list. But what activities are needed to produce the deliverables. And once we know all of the activities, we can sequence them. A logical sequence based on precedence. We talk about dependencies. What order do these activities need to be performed in that's logical? Okay. The activity list is also used to produce estimates. Right? First, you have to estimate the activity resources. Right? Who's going to be doing the work and with what materials? Right? That'll give you resource requirements that can now feed into estimating activity durations. Right? The durations might be different based on the skill level of the resources that are defined. So you want your schedule right? To reflect durations that are expected, right? Not always blue sky. So we take our precedence diagram and our activity durations, we feed that into our project schedule. We develop a project schedule. And that gives you the dates when all of the activities need to be performed. And that establishes a schedule baseline. Our third baseline is a cost baseline. And we do that again by looking at our resource requirements and estimating the cost. The cost of doing the work, the labor cost, the cost of the materials, the cost of perhaps leasing equipment, the cost of supplies, cost of licenses, and determine the budget. Right? Determining the budget is going to compare what was given to us in our project charter. We were authorized for a certain amount of budget, but we didn't know at that point in project initiation whether it was going to be enough or not. But now we've done the work. We've done the planning work that says now I have a good prediction for what my costs are going to be, and we could determine if the budget is sufficient, if we need more, if we could release money, etc. And that becomes our cost baseline. The scope baseline, schedule baseline, and cost baseline actually become part of your project management plan. And from there, we can identify risks. Identify risks in any of these places and record them in something called a risk register, another project document. Risk register is going to record any type of uncertainty, whether they be a threat that could jeopardize your project or an opportunity that could enhance your project. We have to look at it from both ways, because risk, in terms of PMBOK and in terms of project management, is an uncertainty, not necessarily a negative one. We'll analyze those risks, and we have two big words here. We have qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. Qualitative risk analysis, we're looking at basically three things. We're looking at the probability of that risk occurring and the impact if the risk happens to occur. Right? Probability is a percentage. It's a 50% chance of rain. Right? There's a 20% chance of the Mets making the playoffs. Getting back to our baseball analogy. I hope it's better. And urgency. Urgency is based on time. When does that risk become meaningful? And when do we have to monitor it, that it could have an impact on the project? Quantitative risk analysis is when the probability has uncertainty unto itself. And usually the quantitative risk analysis is accompanied by something along the lines of computer modeling, what-if analysis. They talk about in your PMBOK Monte Carlo simulations, where there's just so many variables. It's like predicting the weather, right? Meteorologists don't just look, sometimes it seems like they do, but they don't just look outside and say, well, the sky's clear, it's not going to rain today. No, they've got, all kinds of variables with Gulf streams and wind patterns and barometric pressure, etc., and so on, to predict what the weather's going to be like. That's running through computer models, and that's quantitative risk analysis. Regardless if you're using qualitative, quantitative, or both, they're both going to feed and update your risk register with that information so that you can plan risk responses. You can look and say, how should we plan to respond to the risk? Either by avoiding something that is inevitable, by mitigating the risk, by working around the risk, by We call it transferring, to maybe take some insurance out on your risk so you have a contingency, or at least some type of cushion if that risk should be financially damaging to your project. I'm just going to take a sip of water, and we're going to move on to executing. Project executing, as we said, it's where the work is being done. But we know from project management that textbook best practices, the project manager is not necessarily doing the work. So it's more about the project management leading the team. It's a leadership role, observing what work is being done, communicating, right? Driving the focus of the project team towards the stated objectives, towards the stakeholder objectives, towards the customer expectations. And by doing such, adding value to the work that's being done. That's the role of the project manager. So we're going to look at directing and managing project work. While your team is busy doing what they're best skilled to do, working from your project management plan and the project documents, they're going to produce deliverables. That is the work of the project team, is to produce deliverables. They're also going to have change requests. Right? While the work is going on, people are going to either think of something that wasn't thought of before. Stakeholders might add additional scope that wasn't part of the scope because now they know better, because work is getting done and it's tangible and you could see it, right? Or change requests in response to the work being done that can be done either better or more in line with the overall objectives. Approved change requests are going to be used as input along with your plan, right? They actually become like an addendum to your project management plan and your project documents, these approved change requests. But notice we don't have a mechanism yet where change requests morph into an actual approved change request. We'll get to that in monitoring and control. In addition to doing the work, we're also going to manage project knowledge. Right? As work is going down, we're going to find that there's lessons learned. We're going to learn stuff, and we want to start collecting that in the project execution phase. We don't want to wait. Another common mistake is wait until the end of the project to get the team together and say, well, are there any lessons learned? Well, 6 months ago, they were very fresh in your mind, and now, everybody's tired, worn out from doing the work, want to move on to the next assignment that they have, and lessons learned get, the short end of the deal. But if you're managing your project knowledge while the work is taking place, you'll have something to go on at the end of your project. The project closure, you can bring these back and make it more meaningful. And they might help you right now. If we have lessons learned, yes, they may benefit some poor project management of the future, running over similar ground that you're running over now, but they can actually help you in your current work. So to direct and manage project work, we're managing the team. This is project resource management. In order to manage the team, we've got to acquire resources. We've got to say where the team is coming from, right? Some members of the team might come with the project. We call that pre-assignment. That they're already part of the team as soon as you get your project charter. But in many instances, you have to go out and negotiate within your organization for staff resources and potentially go through procurements for contract employees, for contract workers. You have your team, you want to develop them, right? And we talk about the stages of team development through forming, storming, norming, performing. That's developing your team, having the team execute at a higher level of performance, that can, be of a higher value. And we drive that through communications. Communications with the team and with your stakeholders. The stakeholders engagement will drive quality, because again, quality is a standard that you now need to ensure that the deliverables are being produced to. And there is risk in all of these knowledge areas. So we want to implement risk responses. Remember, we planned risk responses? Now, in project execution is when we actually say, okay, remember what we said we were going to do if this particular risk materializes? Now we're prepared to implement that as a risk response. And all of these feed into direct and managed project work and project knowledge. Monitoring and controlling. Again, we want to monitor and control the project work. We're bringing in our project management plan. We're bringing in our project documents. And we want to determine if there's, through analysis, data analysis, variance analysis, trend analysis, right? If something seems to be building that may not be a problem yet, but may become a problem in the future, a trend, so that we can recommend preventive or corrective actions. That's why we monitor and control. That's why we do all our analysis, right? It's not just have pretty spreadsheets, right? Graphs. We want to take work performance information and transform them into work performance reports. Work performance reports tell a story. Okay? It puts the terms of the analysis into recommendations, into actionable items, and we communicate that. We may communicate that as a change request. So now we see that the project is potentially going to have some change that'll impact your project management plan. So we perform integrated change control. That's where the change requests are documented. Impact analysis. We see what this change is really going to mean, integrated across all the aspects of the project, and have our stakeholder, our sponsor, our customer, or something called a change review board, in some cases, review, approve, or reject the changes. Right? We don't want to just do them because somebody said they're a good idea, or because you as project manager say they're a good idea. We want to make sure that there is discipline so that changes don't just happen haphazardly, that they're controlled. Because changes can affect cost, changes can impact your schedule, changes can impact the scope and quality of the work being performed. We want to make sure that the people that have a stake in the project that you're managing are engaged to appropriately review or reject it. And those become our approved change requests that we referred to in the previous slide, direct and managed project work. Once they're approved, they become part of our baseline. Okay? Once they're approved, they become part of your project management plan, part of your baseline. They are now fully authorized. So the aspects we're going to monitor and control is controlling quality. Right? How do we control quality? Is remember deliverables. That was the output of our direct and managed project work. We're going to inspect the deliverables, right? And transform them into verified deliverables. Think of it as deliverables. The person that's doing the work says, I'm done. And we say, okay, that's great. You might think you're done, but the deliverable isn't done yet until somebody else performs some quality control inspections and could substantiate that they are done. And once they're done, that verified deliverable will now be presented to the customer, to the stakeholder, to validate scope. Is it what they expect? Right? And that becomes your accepted deliverable. I'm sorry, I clicked a little too early on that, but that becomes your accepted deliverable. And monitoring and controlling is going to take in all of the control and monitor processes within all of the knowledge areas. We're going to go into control costs in a little more detail in the next couple of minutes. Something called earned value management and forecasting. But first, we're going to look at where those accepted deliverables go. Right? Now that the customer, the stakeholder, has accepted them, they are what they asked for. We go into project closing. Right? Woohoo, we're done. In close project or phase, we're going to bring in our accepted deliverables. We're going to refer to our project management plan, our project documents. Right? Project documents might be risk issue logs, requirements documents, etc. And our agreements, what was contractually agreed to with third-party providers in order to close the project or phase. Yielding as output a final product, service, or result. Right? Remember, project yields a product, a service, or a result. Transition. That means we're handing it over. We're turning it over to an owner, whether that be an organizational owner, a customer, etc. In closed project or phase, we're going to also bring in our lessons learned that we've been collecting all through project execution. And they will become operational process assets. Remember we said, hey, if we created a better mousetrap or a way to present a schedule that people really liked, we want to put that template in our archive in operational process assets. So, we can look back on it on Sunday, but other project managers within your organization can also do it. And if everybody's taking this approach, right, it makes our collective job easier in the future. You have more to work with. And we have a final report. The final report in project closing is the final numbers. Was there a budget variance at completion? Was there a schedule variance at completion? What open issues might there have been that were accepted in our deliverables, right? Sometimes a customer can say, well, it wasn't exactly what I wanted, but I'll take it, and say, well, maybe in our final report we'll show that there are some things that may need to be addressed into the future, maybe under a separate project, or maybe part of another. So we have a final report. Questions? I don't see anything in my I don't see any questions in my inbox. So I'll give everybody a chance, and right, this is one way. This is, remember, communications management. This is push communications, right? I'm sending you a message, but I'm not necessarily getting feedback immediately. So if anybody that is logged in to the chat, maybe just give me a reminder that either we're good, or if you have any questions. I'm gonna just leave that open for 30 seconds, and if I don't see anything, I'm gonna just continue on with the rest. Will you be giving us these slides? Yes. What I'm going to do is two things, right? One is this particular presentation is going to be up and available on this YouTube link indefinitely. So you can look at it and you can see the slide and you can refer back to them this way. What I'm going to also do is download them as a PDF, right? I'll send it to everybody that's on as a PDF. Let me warn you though, the PDF is not going to have the animation, so they might look a little busy, right? It's going to be the end product, not every interim drop down from those slides. But yes, the answer to the question is yes. Allison, you're actually asking pretty much the same thing as Evelyn. Any question on the material? Comment, right? Before we go on to the next section, the next 35 minutes or so of the presentation. Am I going too fast? Am I coming in clear? Is this working for you? Anybody that it's not working for you, just tell me, slow down a bit. Just tell me, speed up a little bit. I'm falling asleep here, right? I know project management isn't always the most exciting information. I try to make it as enjoyable as possible, but I have my constraints on what I could do with it and still give you the full information. Thanks, Olivia. So we'll have another opportunity for questions. We'll have another opportunity for questions at the end of this section as well. So if you think of something back, going from the beginning of the class, don't hold back if something is going to pose a question. Or you all have my email. You could always send me an email. I'll answer your question at any point in time. Let's give a little refresher on project scheduling and cost control. So from what we were doing before, through our methodology, our PMBOK methodology, we're talking about sequencing activities and activity durations feeding to a project schedule to develop a project schedule, which becomes our schedule baseline. Right? Baseline, the word literally means what is known and approved for the project at this point in time. Okay? So we start out with our precedence diagram. Right? We have one here. We perform activity A, we move along to activity B, activity C. We call that dependencies. A is a predecessor of B. B is a successor to A. Right? So these arrows indicate that activity B cannot start until activity A is completed. Activity C cannot start until activity B is completed. Okay? That is the normal dependency relationship. It's the most popular. I shouldn't say normal, the most popular. But if you notice here, C and D, the dependency has an SS. That means there's a start to start dependency relationship. That means D does not wait until C is completed to start. As soon as C starts, activity D can also start. They start at the same time and can run concurrently. Okay, right? Life isn't serially one after the other. We have things that can occur at the same time. We also have something called lags. We have leads, we have lags. In this case, activity E can begin when C is completed plus 3 days. I should say 3 units of time, but let's just use days. Let's assume our units of time is days. So when activity C completes, E cannot start right away. E has to wait 3 days after activity C has been completed. Right? I think the example that I use in class is activity C is pouring concrete, and activity E can't begin as soon as the concrete is poured. Right? It's got to wait for it to cure and become hard and buildable. Okay? And that can be used for any sorts of examples. Notice activity F. Activity F is dependent upon the completion of both E and D. Activity F cannot begin until activity E is complete and activity D is complete. Okay? And then we have other activities going in parallel to this mess. But this is not a schedule, right? There's no dates. There's no time factors. We don't know how long any of these activities are going to take. We just have a logical sequence. We have dependencies. We have leads and lags. We have an order. Estimate activity durations provides you with an estimate in terms of the number of days each of these activities will take to complete. Okay? So activity A is going to take 4 days, B is going to take 6 days, etc., so on and so forth. If you remember from class, we had 3 methods of deriving estimates. Analogous, meaning that it's something historic, that it was done in the past and can be used as a framework for estimating the current work. Parametric, right? Parametric is when there's a rate, when you can use math to calculate how long it's going to take. If you know that you're doing certain work takes you 3 days per 100 square feet, the number of square feet you have is going to tell you how long it's going to take to do. And we have 3-point estimating in triangular or beta, which works on a combination of 3 different estimates: the optimistic, the pessimistic, and the most likely. And we could either do a straight average or a weighted average to determine those. These are our estimates for these particular activities. And we're going to put them together with our precedence diagram to come up with a schedule. That's how we produce a project schedule. So let's overlay this screen with our precedence diagram. Refer back to our duration estimates from the previous page. And we could drop the durations in to the top center of each of our activities. That becomes our duration. They match. I proofread this twice. If we count up the days on each path, we could see that going along this top path, A, B, C, E, F, is 21 days. Adding up the durations plus this 3-day lag adds up to 21 days. If we go by the path through D, it's 19. Right? I'll help you out with the math. 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 plus 7 is 17, right? Because C and D start at the same time. Plus 2 days for activity F, we have 19 days. So we could see that the top line is our longest duration from start to finish. 21 days is longer than 19. That becomes our critical path. It's still not a schedule. What if the person working on activity E says, well, I'm very busy. I got a lot of things in my hopper. When should I expect to be called on site to perform my activity? Well, just looking at the durations and the precedence diagram, you don't know that. So you got to start with our forward pass. You have to start from the beginning and say, we're going to start on day one, project day one. Activity A has 4 days of duration, meaning it's going to finish, planned to finish on day 4. Right? This is all planning, right? This isn't what's actually happening. We're saying, hey, this is what we're planning to do. Okay. If activity A completes on day 4, activity B can begin on day 5. If it lasts 6 days of duration, it's going to complete on day 10, meaning activity C can begin on day 11. Now, if you're having trouble with this, take out a scratch pad or a calendar and just put them down, assuming that this is September 1st. September 1st through September 4th. And on September 5th, you begin activity B. And as we're going along this now, or if you refer back to the video in the future and you still don't get it, do it with a calendar. It might make it more tangible to you. Activity C is a duration of 3 days, ends on the 13th. So now we can tell activity E resources plan to be ready to start work on the 17th of September or on day 17 of your project. Right? It was 13 plus a 3-day leg. If there was no 3-day leg, it would start on the 14th. So 15, 16, 17. Activity E begins on the 17th. 3 days, ends on the 19th. F begins on the 20th. 2 days, completes on the 21st. And that's what we had said. Notice activity D sitting down here all by its lonesome. It also begins on day 11. Why? Was it start-to-start relationship? Activity C is planned to start on the 11th. So is activity D. 7 days, it completes on the 17th. So that activity F could begin on the 18th. But wait, activity F is dependent upon both activity E and D. So it's got to wait until the 20th. So that E is also planned. I'm going to just make this a little bit more complicated. What if there was some more activity? Remember we had activity question mark before? Let's add in activity X, Y, and Z. And for simplicity, they're each 8 days of duration. Activity X begins on day 5, it ends on day 12. Activity Y begins on the 13th, ends on the 20th. Activity Z begins on the 21st, ends on the 28th. Oh, looky here. 28 is greater than 21. This is our new critical path. And the reason I did that is because when we were dealing with 19 and 21, we could look over here and say, oh, of course, there's 2 days float with activity D. But now, if we continually add more, it becomes more and more complicated to see what your float is. We see what our critical path is now, our longest duration. But now we want to see how much float there is. Float is very important because that tells you how much flexibility you have in your non-critical path activities. Activity Z must complete on the 28th. We call that our late finish date because that's the latest activity Z can complete and still keep to our overall schedule. Activity F must also complete by the 28th. hey, it's planned to complete by the 21st, but you have flexibility because it doesn't have to be finished by the 21st in order to complete the project on time. On-time delivery is dictated by your critical path. So by definition, our critical path has zero float. And so our bottom middle value is zero because there's no float. There's no flexibility. Critical path by definition has no float. Therefore, the late start dates are equal to the early start dates. Because there's no flexibility. The late finish dates are equal to the early finish dates. Those are automatic. You can just write those in. Here's where the brain work has to occur. So we look at activity F. We know activity F has to complete by the 28th in order to stay on schedule. It has a duration of 2, meaning it has to start no later than our late start date. When we say late start date, that means it has to start no later than the 27th. If we subtract our late finish date from our early finish date, 28 minus 21 is 7. That means we have 7 days of float. 7 days of flexibility that activity F can finish on the 22nd, on the 23rd, on the 20th. It's not late unless it exceeds the 28th. So you have 7 days in actual practice that can be used to manage risk. A resource calls out. Supplies don't arrive on time. Bad weather, there's a snowstorm that, causes people to stay home from work. The trains aren't running. Any number of items, right? So let's continue our backward path. If activity F has to complete no later than the 27th, activity E and activity D, right, because they both feed into activity F, must complete no later than the 26th. Let's stick with our top line and say it's 3 days. Activity E has to begin on the 24th. So activity E in a late schedule can work the 24th, the 25th, the 26th, 3 days, and complete and still stay on the late schedule and not upset our delivery date. Again, we do our subtraction, we come up with 7. 7 days of float. 26 minus 19 is 7. Because of the lag of 3 days, activity C must complete no later than the 20th. Okay? In order for activity E to begin on the 24th, with those 3 days of lag, activity C must complete by the 20th. 3 days of duration must begin no later than the 18th. And again, we do our subtraction, we come up with 7. You see a pattern developing here. I see it here too. Let's do B. 17. If B completes on the 17th, activity C can begin on the 18th. 6 days must begin on the 12th. 7 days of float, magical. When we do our subtraction. That's because these 7 days of float are the same 7 days of float. Meaning it's shared across these activities. If activity B doesn't start until the 12th and it uses up all 7 days of float, there's no more float left for these other activities, right? Just follow along. Activity B uses up the 7 days of float. It completes on the 17th. Activity C begins on the 18th. There's no float left. It must go to the 20th, and so on and so forth to complete on the 28th. Okay. Let's look at activity D. Activity D, you could think of it as another path, right? It's subordinate path. Activity D must complete on the 26th. It has a duration of 7. Therefore, it must begin on the 20th. or no later than the 20th. If it begins on the 21st, it's going to below your schedule. We do our subtraction, we have 9 days. We have 9 days of float, right? Activity D is planned to begin on the 11th, but it could start 9 days later on the 20th and still complete on time if your duration estimate is good. Take a moment. Any questions? We went through probably one of the trickiest, in my experience, from the classes that I've been teaching. I've been teaching them now for almost 6 years, 5.5 years, at both Nassau and Suffolk. And this seems to be the one that really throws students for a loop more often than not. So I hope this was of some value to you. I hope this supplemented your learning and makes it clearer for your ongoing knowledge. I'm going to just take a second again to grab myself a sip of water. See if you have any questions, if you want anything to go over. Otherwise, we have another 15 minutes roughly to go over some of the other tricky components of project management in cost control, right? That's math. That's where everybody starts to maybe, I don't know. I teach this class at night, so maybe you're getting tired at that point. Maybe it's a little easier now. You can refer back to this, in the morning with a fresh cup of coffee, and maybe it'll be a little easier for you. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move right along. There'll be one more opportunity to ask questions. There'll be one more opportunity to ask questions at the conclusion. Good. I'm looking at some of the comments they have, so it seems pretty positive so far. Let's make the screen big again, and I'll share the next section. So control cost. Right? Controlling cost has two basic objectives. Earned value management is a status. It's as of the current date or a date slightly in the past of variances, right? We want to see how are we performing relative to our plan or our baselines, right? Either as of today, as of now, as we speak, or maybe as of the end of the month. Right? It might take you some time to compile the information and put together an earned value report, right? So we might say, as of July 31st, right, here's our current status. Okay. Point in time, as opposed to forecasting, which is a prediction, right? Forecasting, we're looking to the future with our crystal ball and our psychic powers to a future date or project completion. What is it going to look like? What's our cost relative to budget going to look like at the end? Or answer the question, what have we learned thus far that could be useful in determining what will be? Okay. So let's start with earned value. And we want to know, it answers two questions. Is the project ahead or behind schedule, and by how much? Right? What is our status relative to schedule? And is the project under or over budget, and by how much? What is our actual spending as compared to our baseline? So let's look at schedule first. Let's look at our schedule variance. comparing what we said we're going to do versus what we actually did as of a particular date and time. The formula says we want to take our earned value minus our planned value, EV minus PV. Earned value is what have we earned? What do we have to show for our time spent on the project? What work has been completed? Versus planned value, what did we plan to have completed by this point in time? Let's look at it in terms of a little example. On this map, we have road work. We're managing a road work project that started on January 1st. Okay, project started on January 1st to do road work from Tucson, Arizona to Tucumcari, New Mexico. Okay, here we go. There's our route. We planned to complete the project by October 31st. Okay. Our budget is $590,000. So roughly, here's an assumption here, or roughly, the costs were planned at $1,000 per mile, right? We have 585 miles. We have $590,000, roughly $1,000. And it's scheduled for 10 months, so roughly 59 miles per month. So let's just look at this as a straight line project, right? Normally in projects, you can't just assume that you divide your work by the total amount of dollars and that's going to pan out. You're going to have a more complex schedule than that. But for the purposes of this example, it's just a straight line, $1,000 per mile, 59 miles per month. Now, we're looking at this, and we look right here, right up here where this arrow is, plan to be here by July 31st. We had planned to complete 410 miles worth of road work by July 31st. But as of July 31st, work is completed to Las Cruces. That's where that little yellow mark is right there. As of July 31st, the work has actually been completed to here, 234 miles at a cost of $210,000. Okay? So now we have our actual schedule, our actual planned value and earned value. Our planned value is $410,000. We plan to complete 410 miles, right? At $1,000 a mile is $410,000. We've only completed 234 miles. So our value of the work completed is $234,000. If we subtract what we accomplished from what we plan to accomplish, we end up with a negative $176,000. That's just math, subtraction. We're behind schedule. We end up with a negative number. That's bad. We're behind schedule. And we're significantly behind schedule. Okay? That's our schedule variance. Let's look at our cost variance, right? Because cost and schedule are two different things. Our cost variance formula is again starting with our earned value and subtracting our actual cost, what we actually spent to earn that amount of deliverable. Our actual cost is $210,000. It's given. How do we know it's $210,000? Because that's the total of the checks we wrote, right? That's what's missing from our pocket. We've spent $210,000. We've earned $234,000 worth of road work. So if we subtract them, we get a positive $24,000. 234 minus 210,000. We're under budget, right? We're under budget because we've actually accomplished more work than we paid for. We're behind schedule There's no getting around that, but we're under budget. So when looking at schedule and cost, they're two different things. They could tell two different stories. Another way of looking at it is through something called a schedule performance index. And instead of subtracting the earned value minus the planned value, we could divide it. Take our earned value divided by our planned value, and you get a percentage. You get 0.57. This tells us that we've completed 57% of the work that was planned to be completed. Right? That might be easier communicated, right? You could use both. You could use whatever your stakeholders feel more comfortable in using, right? Because that's what it's all about, to engage the stakeholders in this status so that we can take corrective action or preventative action. The same way we have a schedule performance index, we have a cost performance index, where we divide our earned value divided by our actual cost, and we end up with 1.11, right? We're under budget. That's good. We're 11% surplus, right? We're working at an 11% surplus. We're under budget. That's another way of presenting these numbers, okay? It could be helpful. Again, the earned value is a point in time. It's, in this example, it was as of July 31st. Forecasting answers the question, how much will it cost when it's done, right? Okay, we're behind schedule, we're ahead on cost, whatever. What's this going to mean when we're done? When we're eventually done. Not when it's going to be done time-wise, but when it's going to be done, how much is it going to cost me? We call that an estimate at completion, EAC. The formula for an estimate at completion is our actual cost, what we've spent so far, plus our estimate to completion, our prediction of what the remaining work is going to cost us to complete. How much have we already spent, plus how much more do we expect to spend on remaining work? Again, back to our example, Tucson to Tucumcari. We've spent $210,000. We say it's at an actual cost of $210,000. But what is our estimate to completion? How do we determine what the cost is going to be on our remaining work? Well, first we have to say, what is our remaining work? Well, we know our remaining work is going from Las Cruces to Tucumcari, right? This end of the blue line right there. But in terms of money, our remaining work is our budget. Our budget was $590,000 minus what we've already completed, our earned value, right? We've already earned and completed the work from Tucson to Las Cruces. We've already completed $234,000 worth of work. So our estimate to completion would be $356,000 if we subtract 590 minus 234. $356,000. We add our actual cost plus our estimate to completion, and we end up with $566,000. That would be how much money we could expect to spend at the end of our project, assuming that our variances up to this point were atypical. If we looked at getting the work done from Tucson to Las Cruces, we came in under budget. If we expect that under budget performance to continue throughout the rest of our road work, we could factor in our cost performance index and divide our estimate to completion by 1.11. What's that going to do? It's going to lower your estimate to completion. We're going to say, well, we saved money, we came in under budget thus far, And if we can make the assumption that we're going to continue to come in under budget, right? Our remaining work is going to cost proportionally less, dividing by 1.11. So our actual cost doesn't change. That's money out of pocket. That 210 is money out of pocket. Plus 320 now adds up to 530,720. Now, I say it's one or the other because there's a judgment involved there. There's a judgment call. We don't know for sure whether or not we're going to do our remaining work with the savings that we've encountered up to this point. We don't know for sure if we're going to complete our remaining work according to our original budget estimates, or we don't know if it's going to be something else, right? But what we can do is advise our stakeholders based on judgment, based on our best prediction. If we expect those savings to continue, we could term it as such and say we expect our estimate at completion to be 530,720 if we continue, assuming we continue to reap those benefits. Otherwise, it might go as high as 566,000. Okay, so it's a tool, it's a judgment, it's not a magic wand. Okay, I hope that helped. I hope that helped. Again, questions, comments. It's now 8 o'clock, so we kind of kept right to time. I'm going to just switch back to split screen of sorts where I can see what's coming in. See Shamari, helpful, but still the most complicated part of the materials. Yeah, that's why I chose to do this here, because I figured that it might be an area that some of you can get some value from, right? Maybe hearing it again, maybe working with it again, maybe reviewing it again tomorrow, and over time slowing it down, rewinding and playing back, and maybe making up some of your own types of problems. Like the one that I presented with you. You could just change the numbers around and see if you can figure things out. Yeah, forecasting, that's the toughest. Forecasting, yeah, it's a little more involved because it's there's a judgment involved in it, right? There's prediction involved in it, and it's not 100% foolproof, right? It's not foolproof. It's a best guess. It's a hypothesis, right? Can you give another example using a schedule variance? Well, I don't know what another example is really going to do at this time. I'm really not prepared to make one up off the cuff. But if I can give it a shot real quickly. If we're doing this webinar and I planned on having this webinar for 90 minutes, I said, 6:30 to 8 o'clock, right? We're at 8:02. I'm doing pretty good. And I had 3 sections. And maybe after the first section, I looked down and it was at about the 45-minute rate. And I said, I'm on plan. If it was at, an hour and 15 minutes and I only had, or an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and 25 minutes, and I only had 5 minutes left to do the schedule, critical path exercise, and the cost controls, I would say I'm running behind schedule, and I could do the value of my time divided, subtracting how much I'm running over where I plan to be, and determine, hey, you know what, I'm running about 45 minutes behind, and in terms of my time, it has a certain value. Yes, absolutely. So I hope that, Genevieve, that may give you another thing. Um, if you do practice tests, I think, you know, I'm not here to sell my book, but I think most of you bought the book with the practice questions. If you go through that, there's examples in there of schedule variance, cost variance, and I think I explained the answers, how I arrived at the figures through the math as well. So you can look back there. If you're interested, if you don't have the book and you're interested, send me an email. I'll help you out there. Could we change the numbers to learn? Evelyn, right? Yeah, you could take that example that I have there, just write it out, and then change all the numbers and go through it again. You could do your schedule exercise, your critical path exercise, and change the durations on all the activities, and just to practice the same thing over and over again, and you'll probably get something out of that. And if you're not sure, send me your work and I'll take a quick look at it and let you know if you're on the right track or not. You know, I live for this stuff. Nice people. I'll do everything I can to support you in understanding this stuff. So I want to wrap things up as I don't see any other questions coming across. So again, I really thank you, right, for your time. Right? Thank you for your time, your attention, participating in this event, this little activity of ours. And, you know, I'm open to doing this periodically again with slightly different topics. That if you say, hey, you know what, there's something else that if you could do another webinar, and it doesn't have to be 90 minutes, it could be 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever, on different project management topics, on agile, on risk management, other practical things. I was thinking of using project management software to actually go through scheduling, using something that's more automated. If that's something that you'd like to do, just like I said, shoot me an email. Let me know. Otherwise, I'm gonna kind of break from now. I see a lot of thank yous. I thank all of you, and I hope to see you again in time. So with that, I'll be signing off.